Okay, so we have one more session before lunch, and we're gonna get back to method refinement. Obviously, the methods that Andy just presented were highly refined, but this was an idea that Mike had fairly early on, and we did an experiment. We never published the work because the data had some issues, but I think it's very instructive to look at the data. It's still dealing with the data in a manual sort of processing way, but what we'll find is that there are a lot of things that you can learn about data when you look closely. So actually, yeah, I just realized that I didn't finish my Monday presentation. So I just want to quickly touch on some slides that I skipped over on Monday. Whoa. Because, yeah, at its heart, Skyline is designed for this type of use, and I will caution you that as human beings, I read this psychological work by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winning psychologist, where he had this term, what you see is all there is. And so we are cognitively just prone to jumping to conclusions and making stories around what we can see, plausible stories. And if you don't see enough, you will actually create the wrong story. And so Skyline, I think, myself coming from a software development background and a background of debugging software, I've always been approaching Skyline as trying to increase the visibility into an immediacy of being able to ask a question and get it answered in Skyline. So Skyline is very much designed for you to see more. And so, so I came up with this, what you see is what you believe. And if you just sort of rush past your data to getting to statistics, Olga's going to be in here talking about statistics. If you go to statistics too quickly before you've looked at your data, you're gonna make mistakes. It doesn't matter how good your statistics are. If you haven't done a lot of work making sure that the data going in is really good, you'll come to faulty conclusions. And so, in proteomics, we typically would love to have this, start running statistics on what I see as the proteomics satellite view, right? So this is a satellite view of the land, and you can actually learn things from it for sure. You can see that there's a lot of center pivot irrigation being used. There maybe are some areas that are fallow, and some that are clearly quite healthy. And this is the proteomics satellite view that lots of people would love to just have a tool that spat this out and gave us an intensity, just an intensity value, or ideally an absolute or calibrated quantified value for every analyte we're interested in over every sample. If we could get to that just sort of automatically, those would be ideal tools for us. But in reality, when we go into looking at what's underneath, we may see stuff like this, where this is a case where the chromatography is not so good, and you can see, maybe there's some spray instability, but we don't have a nice smooth peak. We have a very jagged peak, and in fact, in the face of this, many tools, including other tools, besides Skyline for sure, may chop the peak up. And so in this case, we haven't integrated the entire peak. We would prefer it if Skyline had actually set the peak borders like around here and around here, but it's put it right in the middle. So that's a problem, and only through tools that allow us to see that can we correct it or know that we have that issue. And then here's another problem where we actually have a clear interference. And we would ideally be choosing what to do about this. Skyline at this point, if you just accepted this intensity as your value, you've got a very clear interference here that's more intense than the peak itself. At the very least, you'd like to have this integration boundary moved over between these two, but no matter what you do, there's probably going to be contribution to your peak area from this brown. And so maybe you would like to exclude it from your quantitative values across the board. And then here's a case where it's just the wrong peak. And so if Skyline, in this case, Skyline chose this thing over here, there's a clear ID in the middle of this one. That turned out to be a bug, and it was a bug that we were notified of only because we have such high visibility that people will say, hey, why did Skyline pick this peak? And then we fixed it. But other tools have similar bugs. We were just at the DIA swath course in ETH, and we pulled up some peak picks that Open Swath had done, and found that it had actually mispicked the peaks, one of the IRT peaks, and I still don't know why. So we're gonna hopefully get the Open Swath developers to answer that question for us. But again, the people in the course were ready to start running statistics on their Open Swath results, and it wasn't until we said, "Hey, look, sometimes you're getting the wrong peak," that they even realized that. So I'm going to skip over that. I think I'll just move back to the rest of my content, and so we're going to start using Skyline to dive in deeper and look at some data that has some problems and see how Skyline helps us see those problems more quickly. And I will say that in my own experience, I have had people send me data sets that I bring up issues with the data sets within half an hour of having the data that they have spent weeks to months with the data and never realized. So I think I would highly suggest, whether it's Skyline or any other tool, you should be seeking high visibility and ability to dive in and look at your data. So back to this, we've talked about this multiple times, this method refinement, and what you can do in here. And one of the things that Mike came up with was we might do an actual differentiation experiment as a refinement, right? So if we have some sort of something of interest, we don't necessarily need to buy synthetic peptides and go all the way down to producing a full clinically validated quantitative assay for all of the possible peptides if we know that some of them don't actually help us differentiate between cases and controls. So he came up with the idea that we could even let's just stay label free until we have some indication that we have a peptide or a protein that is, helps us to differentiate. And so that we decided to try in a set of 14 rats. They were part of a rat model. There's salt-sensitive rats, and the experiment was performed that 7 of the rats had a low salt diet and lived happy, healthy lives until they were sacrificed for this experiment and their plasma taken. And then we're going to look at data measured from their plasma. And the other 7 were fed a high salt diet until they experienced heart failure. So pretty extreme. But the idea was to see whether we could see these differences in 109 proteins that had been reported in literature related to heart disease. So we got healthy, happy rats and extremely unhealthy rats. We really should be able to see some differences. And then, could we perform this level of refinement where we would come out with candidates and then go validate the candidates with more precise measurements. So again, we started similar to the way that we started with that worm experiment yesterday, where we took all 109 proteins, digested them, or used in silico digestion to come up with 2,165 peptides that seemed within our measurable range for our instrument. That led us to 12,000 transitions, with the full Y-ion series from Y3 to YN, possibly YN minus 1. And then that, on a triple quadrupole, took us 151 sample injections, which now, typically in our lab, we would now bypass that stage using DIA. But this was before we were doing DIA or swath. And so we just decided, well, let's try it on a triple quadrupole. We'll just measure everything, sort of the way yesterday you had 39 injections to measure all of those worm peptides. We just did 151 injections to measure all of these potential heart disease biomarker proteins. And so then this is a figure that we thought might be in the paper, but we ended up not publishing the paper. So this is, again, just summarizing what I just told you. And then we went to a differentiation phase. So between detection and differentiation, we ended up with 14 proteins that, with just a simple sample prep, we felt that we could detect, and so 49 proteins that we felt we could detect. So we lost over half the proteins, and if we wanted to detect those proteins, we would have to do new work. Maybe we would express them, and we could certainly do other refinement experiments to try to capture more of these, but we were just trying to sort of get through this workflow. So we said, okay, 49 proteins, that's pretty good. Let's see if we can see differences in them. And then we had 135 peptides, so you can see about somewhere between 2 to 3 proteins per, or 2 to 3 peptides per protein in this case, and then this many transitions, and we got that down with scheduling. So it's still more transitions that you could run in a mass spectrometer, even that can measure 200 peptides concurrently without scheduling. But with scheduling, we were able to get it down to a single injection method and run 42 injections. So 42 divided by 14, we had 3 replicates per biological individual. And then the idea was that we would take anything that actually showed some potential difference out to this validation phase, and maybe we would do, even more refinement, like collision energy optimization and other things. So this is again a summary of this, and this is what the scheduling graph looked like in Skyline. And so you can see with a, what does that say? 4-minute window? Yeah, so with a 4-minute window, we get, concurrent peptides, a little over 60. We actually used a 5-minute window, so maybe we had, at a maximum, 80 concurrent transitions. It still took us 6 unscheduled injections to measure all these transitions. So over 100 transitions per unscheduled injection, and then we scheduled them similar to the way we scheduled our runs yesterday. So this is a summary. This is the rat plasma experiment by Daniela Tomazella, who was at the postdoc in our lab at that point. 14 subjects, 7 healthy diseased. Technical triplicate. Proteins came from literature. There's no labeling, no label reference peptides. We didn't have very much spectral library coverage. That's why we just decided to go with everything and measure the entire Y-ion series. And then, so yeah, we just measured exhaustive tryptic peptides with Y3 through YN minus 1. And that's what we're going to now look at. Oh, I guess. Have some more slides. All right, well, I'll go through these. So prior knowledge and consistency, I think we've been hammering on this a little bit, but we know from now years of working on targeted proteomics that the more we know about our analytes, the more consistently we can measure them, and there are certain properties that are hard to just calculate. We're very good at calculating mass to charge ratio, so we don't need to measure something to figure out its mass to charge ratio. But there are other things about molecules that are very hard to predict, and so our best path forward is to do empirical measurement. And then once we have the empirical measurements, they're powerful enough to be used across a lab, but they're also really, cross lab or cross experiment, but they're even more powerful run to run. And the two most important ones that I would have you focus on are this relative ion abundance, and that's why we have spectral libraries. It's the relative ion abundance for fragment ions is very consistent, and so if we fragment a peptide in the same way over and over again, we're going to get a similar distribution of how the fragment ions come out in a mass spectrometer. And so this is powerful enough to be used cross-laboratory, and that's why we have spectral libraries. But when we do a set of runs, right, one after another on the same instrument, we expect that to be very consistent as well. And then retention time we've already been talking about, and it's powerful enough to be used cross-lab and cross-experiment, and we store it as this IRT, or normalized retention time. But again, we have certain expectations of retention time over the life of an experiment, and we can use that when we look at the data. So these are views in Skyline that we're going to start looking at. These are the 42 runs with diseased and healthy kind of marked out, and the subjects marked. And then across here, you can see the various, this is 6 fragment ions, and you can see these bands of color sort of representing the consistency of the fragmentation. So these are the peak areas of the various transitions, and you can see that they're very consistent. Is there anything you see between diseased and healthy in this plot? Can somebody make an observation of the bands between diseased and healthy?
More variability?
Yeah, there's more variability in the disease than the healthy. And so what you'll learn as you become more expert at this is that that's an indication of, well, who can guess? What's that an indication of? Is it an indication that there's just more variability in area between diseased and healthy? Why would we get more variability?
Retention time variability.
Well, there's some retention time variability, but we're up on this plot.
If you are at the lower detection limit, your lines between, the ratios get a little bit blurred.
Yeah, so when we have low abundance, we're going to see more variability. So that's just true of so while everything is normalized to 100% here, so you can't see these are not perfectly consistent measurements. This is just the relative abundance of each ion, and you get more variability when the intensity is lower. And so if I just go to denormalize there, you can see that's denormalized, and I'll come back to that in a second. And you can see it's very low abundance. But kind of amazing that even at that, there's like 100-fold difference between diseased and healthy, and it's still surprisingly similar. And even though there's there's probably like 5-fold difference among the healthy, it's incredibly stable. So that's just an expression of how stable the relative fragmentation is across runs on the same instrument. Okay, and then we have down here. This is the retention time stability. What does anybody have any observations about it or comments about it? It's not, well, I mean, it's not terrible. Let's see, what's the range here? Yeah, I mean, so the center, the apexes of the peaks are these lines here, and they probably vary within a half a minute. So not terrible, but not great. It's the integrated range of the peak is this, and those are also about a half a minute, which is we would like, that's pretty decent chromatography when you're getting half-minute peaks, and but Yeah, and another thing to realize, so I also would say, oh, I'd probably call this one out. What happened to that one? Is that even the right peak? It sort of seems to be standing out of the distribution. But another thing that you should always be thinking about is, how did you sort these runs? They're not necessarily sorted in the order that they were acquired. Because of my confusion over this, there's a feature, for those of you who showed up for the IRT in the morning, there's a feature in Skyline where you can sort things by acquired order, and then you may see a much more understandable pattern. So this is a logical ordering, it's not acquired ordering, and then we'll see that we can sort by acquired ordering in Skyline, and that sometimes will make things make more sense. So this one kind of sticks out. When you process the data, you'll see that one sticks out all the time, and you'll start to get used to it and go, oh yeah, that's the one that sticks out. If we were able to normalize these by IRTs, then this would all get a lot tighter. So this is denormalized, and you can see that, yeah, it's like probably 100-fold difference between the diseased and healthy. But even 8 to 2, so 4-fold difference within the diseased, but the relative abundance is very similar. This is the other peptide from this protein haptoglobin, so it actually appears to be one of the better biomarkers in this study. I think I'm going to skip this, and we'll go start working on the data itself. So. You want to go to your go to your folder for the course, and the data we're going to be working on is in the group studies folder. So ideally, if you have it's still small enough data that there aren't going to be any errors, I don't think, for anybody. So you want to go to your map drive, grab group studies, and drag it across to documents. And it looks like some people beat me because mine's not coming instantly. So yeah, everybody in the room copying at the same time might slow us down a little bit, but we'll get there. And then, as long as we're at it, I'm going to mention that tomorrow we're going to need a lot more data. So people could go to the, during breaks, maybe over lunch today, if you go to the participants folder and the tutorial files, these are ones that are not going to be easy to. They're going to give you errors. Actually, yeah, what we're going to... we're going to do... tomorrow we'll be working with DIA. And so you're going to need, out of this... Boy, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to write this down for you guys. Yeah, there's a fair amount of data to download, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that. And people are going to have to try to download it during breaks today, I think, and later tonight. Okay, so but does everybody have the group studies now? Somebody still waiting? Well, so you can also, I guess you don't need to start up Skyline. Anybody need more time? Okay. Well, let me go. I'm going to go look at what's in my folder. So now that I've got it downloaded, you can see there's actually, under group studies, there's heart failure, We used to have an ovarian cancer data set in here too, so that's why it's got this subfolder. Could now be called group study. And in here we've got a rat plasma.sky.zip, and then in the raw data, in the raw folder we've got annotations.xlsx, and then a bunch of MZML files which started their lives as raw data files and were just converted for performance reasons. And then down at the bottom we have a rat plasma.sky file. Anybody need more time? Is there still somebody needs more time? Okay. So I guess I'm gonna, while we're waiting for the people who need more time, I'm gonna open up annotations.xls, which we will come back to in a bit. So here you can see that in annotations.xls, we've got subject ID, bioreplicate, and condition. And then we've got values for all of our 42 samples. So these are sample annotations that we're going to use when we actually start running statistics. Although actually we're not going to do hopefully we're not going to do statistics till after lunch. Though we may annotate this before lunch. Okay. Hopefully everybody's caught up. At this point, what I'd like everybody to do is just double click on ratplasma.sky down in the raw folder. Don't worry about there's a ratplasma.sky.zip at the top. Don't open that. That's for later. That's a fully processed file that I processed myself a long time ago. All right, and then I'm going to, I'm in a mode where I'm seeing all the transitions, and I'm just going to go edit, collapse all, I think peptides, just so that I have an overview of all the peptides in my targets window. And so this is, a fully formed set of targets that came out of refinement. So you can imagine that we did the experiment we did yesterday on these proteins and came out with these peptides. And then we exported a method and measured it. We exported the scheduled method. So yesterday we ended with exporting a scheduled method and then just measuring it on 5 technical replicates and looking at variance, which might have been, I don't think that was done, that experiment was done here, but that might have been a great thing to do, is just like, can I measure this reproducibly? So in this experiment we got, I think Daniela got to, these are the things I think I can measure. I don't think she did a CV experiment to see which ones were measurable with decent CVs. And we'll see why we think that's likely true once we start looking at the data. So, and then so I've got the library match tab here. If I click on the first peptide, I can see a very nice spectrum. If I click on the second peptide, I can't see any spectrum. And if you went through all these peptides, about half of them would have spectra. And so that means that we doubled, if we had only taken stuff from the spectral library, the spectral libraries that we had at the time, we would have half as many peptides at this point. So by sort of throwing the net wide open and looking at everything, we were able to double the number of peptides we could target. Let's take the library match, click on the tab, and just drag it over to the right-hand side. Dock it on the right-hand side, and then push this push bin, which kind of puts it out of the way, because we're mostly going to be looking at chromatograms, but anytime we want to look at this spectrum, we can just put the mouse cursor over that little tab. People get that? Are people getting starting to feel comfortable with arranging windows however you want them? We're going to do a little bit more of that, but let's get the data importing. So File, Import, Results. And they're single injection replicates. And there they are. They should just all be sitting there right in the raw data folder where you open your Sky file, yeah?
Do you think you will make a keyboard shortcut for import?
For import results?
Results, yeah, like you have for the managed results, for example.
Yeah, I mean, we could. You're doing it so much in this course that I don't think people necessarily do it as much, but certainly we could if, you know.
I think it would be quite handy.
Okay. Well, anyway, we can definitely do that. So let's keep going here, though. So just drag a rectangle to select all of them. And then click Open. And again, we get this nice window showing us the import progress, and it should go fairly quickly. But we can, if we don't want to deal with that, we can hide this. Why don't everybody just hide their window as it's importing? And we'll focus on rearranging the graphs. We try to make Skyline as sort of multi-threaded as possible so that you're not blocked when things are going on. So who has the peak area replicates and retention time replicates views up? Is there anybody who doesn't have them up? Okay, so if you don't have them up, go to View, Retention Times, Replicate Comparison, and click on that, and then View Peak Areas, Replicate Comparison, and click on that. And there are keyboard shortcuts for both of those, which you can learn. So does everybody have them up now? Okay. Another thing that you can see is when we just look at these retention time, the first retention time plot, does everybody have this GIL peptide selected? If you look at the retention time plot, you can see holes in it, right? So I'll zoom in a little bit. You see how I don't see all 5 colors that I'm expecting here, right? They're not. It's not just blocks of 5 colors like this one is, but the other ones have holes. So does anybody remember from this morning what that's an indication of, and how we could correct that if we want to do more precise quantification? So, yeah, integrate all. So just go to Settings, Integrate All, and then that'll fill those blocks in. And that's, if we're doing a quantitative experiment, we generally just want to be in Integrate All mode. So let's everybody grab the targets window by the title bar and pull it off the main window so that we have everything floating. We have targets, peak areas, and retention times floating. And then I'm going to show you what I think is the most effective layout for working with this stuff. And so I'm going to move these windows up a little bit to give myself some space. And then what I want to do is grab the retention times window and drag it down to the bottom and dock it at the bottom. So again, drag it so that the cursor is in that bottom box, and I see a blue stripe across the bottom. And then I can let go. And once it's docked, I can move my cursor into the gap between the chromatograms and the retention times, and I can move a splitter bar to give more space to that. And then I can take, yes, go ahead.
So how do you move the library managed to
Okay, so if you didn't remove library match, and you want to get rid of it, you can. What I did was I went to view. So you would do view library match to bring it up, and then no matter where it is, you then could grab it and put it over on the right side. So drag it to the right side so it's docked on the right side, and then unpin it. And that makes it sort of a window shade. So there's a little push pin up in the title bar. And if you just click on the push pin, if you hover over it, it says auto hide. And then now what I also want you to do is to dock this peak areas view. So just drag it down until you see a little cross in the middle of the retention times view, and put it to the right side of the retention times view, like that. Got that? All right, I'm gonna, just to make sure that we all actually reach this state, I'm gonna come around and have a look at everybody quickly. And then finally, the last thing to do is to take this targets view and dock it to the left. So that gives us, full screen real estate on the bottom for our peak areas and retention times. I'm going to right-click in my retention time plot and undo all zoom and pan so that it shows up better. And then I'm also going to right-click in the peak areas plot, and this is where we're going to do normalize to total, and that gives us this set of color stripes, except that the colors don't show up very well on a projector, so I'm going to go to my tools, and you don't necessarily have to do this, but display, and I'm going to choose high contrast here. It doesn't totally show up great either. Distinct? I think that's better. Okay.
Where are you seeing display in your tools?
Tools, options, display. It's a tab, and then you can choose the color scheme, and I'm going with distinct. So if you want to see the same colors as me, go ahead and choose distinct. And I will just walk around and see how people have done. No, it looks great. Okay, so now one last thing is let's go to view, arrange graphs, and we're gonna, if we've been able to choose things like tiled, but if we chose tiled at this point, we have 42 things, and we're just gonna get a bunch of squares like that, which is not gonna show us much. So, although I will say that this is a great time to ask your manager to buy you 2 very large screens, or even 3, because Skyline is capable of rendering quite a lot, and definitely people feel like they can get a lot of information. The Skyline's very low latency and can render a lot for you, and if you have the screen real estate to use it, that can be. You can see more quickly. So, but we're going to just go with grouped, arrange graphs grouped, and we're going to use groups of 3 because that's the number of technical replicates we have. Distribute the graphs among the groups, and we'll arrange them just in a row. And we're going to use the sort order document, and that's it. So once you get to 3 group panes, distribute graphs among groups, row, and document, then you can click OK.
What does sort order document indicate?
That means it's the order that we have the replicates in the document. And so I'll show you what that order is in just a second. But let's just go here. Everybody got it? Still some people double checking, it looks like. Okay, so then once you've got that 3, distribute, row, document, click OK. And that should give you a much more usable arrangement. But you can see that we have this legend repeated 3 times, which we don't necessarily want. Most of the time I'd like to have the legend appear just once, so I'm gonna put my legend. You can choose where you want to put your legend. I'm going to put mine on the retention times. So if you don't have a legend on retention times, go ahead and right-click on retention times the way I did and turn on the legend. And then I'm going to turn it off on the chromatogram. So you can right-click and turn off the legend. And so yeah, so this is the order. When it says ordered document, this is the order. It's a logical ordering. I named the files so that they would come up in this order where all the disease are first and all the healthy are second, and then all the subjects grouped together. So another order that was offered is order by acquired time. So let's go see what that does. So I'm gonna double click on the title bar of retention times, which pops it out. And that's the way I can get it out here so that you can get a better view of what's going on. Take up the whole screen with it. All right, so, one question you might ask is like, okay, I showed, when we did IRTs in the morning, I showed people that sometimes there was a 2-minute difference that was happening over and over again, and when I ordered by acquired time, it suddenly became a shape, right? There was some retention time drift, and then drift to later. So you might ask, like, okay, is retention time variance really this crazy, or is there maybe some drifting going on? So a quick way to check that is to order by acquired time. So let's right-click and click order and acquired time. And that didn't necessarily fix things, did it? I mean, I don't know, maybe it may, let's see, what order by, and we can switch back to order by document. I don't know, maybe a little bit, but clearly there's still something going on here. Let's take a quick look at the acquired time. What can people tell me about the acquired time? The acquired order. How were they ordered? So our document order was like this, where we had subject 102, 1, 2, 3, subject 103, 1, 2, 3, subject 108, 1, 2, 3. What would be the problem with this ordering? Like if we had actually acquired them in this order, why wouldn't we want to acquire them in this order?
You're acquiring the disease and the healthy totally separately.
Yeah, that would be problematic. And then so we have a long, and then we have a long, very long time between 102 and 162. So we do prefer to see. So let's go back to acquired time order. We do prefer, if we're going to be collecting technical replicates, we'd like to have them collected like this, where we're collecting all of the subjects 3 times. So we've got 3 separate experiments, and this is a type of blocking. So that my relative abundance between rep 1 of 102 and 103, and then my relative abundance of rep 102 and 103, subject 102 and 103, they remain close together in this cycle. But within the cycle, my heart kind of actually sunk when I did this. And why did my heart sink when I first did this acquired order? It's really exactly what you just said. Is we're still basically separating diseased and healthy perfectly, and we would prefer to see these in random order. So that is something to keep in mind as we look in this data, because let's go over what effect that will have, right? What if there's just a systematic problem with our mass spectrometer where our signal is declining over the life of our experiment? What will we see? Right? The mass spectrometer let's say we have no way of normalizing it away, and there's just sort of a decline of signal over the experiment. That makes the order a confounding variable, and since we didn't randomize, it's going to cause us to think what about peptides in the disease versus in the healthy? What's that? Yeah.
You're going to underestimate how much signal there was in the healthy.
In the healthy. So we're gonna see a bias toward thinking that there's an elevated amount in diseased, right? So it's a mistake. It's a ordering is really important in mass spectrometry. It can become a confounding variable, and with this ordering, if there's any sort of systematic change, it's going to cause us to have a bias in our results. So, okay, so I'm going to put that back. So let's get back to processing this data. Do we want to? So I'm telling you, I guess, that you don't want to just run statistics on this data before you've ever looked at it, right? I mean, we could just export a report and start using MS Stats. But I'm saying that you should at least look at some of it. So what about this first peptide? Is this ready for statistics? Probably not. Okay, so what's wrong with it? It may not even be consistently integrated. We see these. So if you were to guess where the peptide is, where would you say it might be? What time? Right? If we think that it's going to be coming out at a relatively consistent time, what's the most likely time that it's coming out? Yeah, about 19. If you just kind of blur your eyes and look for some linear trend, horizontal linear trend, most things are lining up at 19. So that's the most likely place it could be. So another thing we can do is we can denormalize this graph, the peak area graph, and normalize to none. And now we can also, these are all interactive plots. So we can click on things in the retention time plot, and you'll see that you get a little rectangle around what's selected. We would also like to be clicking on things that have a very high intensity, because those are going to be the best representations we can possibly find of our thing. So if I look at this one, this is one of the best ones, right? Do I see coelution? What do I see coelution of? Anybody? Okay, so I would say Y3 and Y4 are the most intense, right? So you got to be looking at these. You look at the legend, and it's written there for you what the colors are. So you got to get used to looking at the legend and going, okay, that's Y3 and Y4, and then maybe there's a little of Y6 and Y8. There's seems to be actually over here. There's also something going on for Y6. So in my most intense samples, although definitely Y3 and Y4, I'm less convinced about Y6. Right? So Y3 and Y4 are those particularly reliable fragment ions for my peptide? If so, or if not, why or why not? Go ahead. They what? They have different peak shapes? Yeah, I mean, this is also pretty low abundance down at 3,000. I think that these are co-eluting. These two things are co-eluting. They're caused by it's like, you definitely get, down at this low abundance, we're not getting nicely formed peaks. But I would say that I have pretty high confidence that Y3 and Y4 are co-eluting, and I would say they're probably caused by a peptide. I just don't think they're caused by my peptide. But, so if you're in a lab meeting and somebody shows you something like this, and I've been in a lab meeting where somebody said, I thought I had my peptide, and then I ordered a synthetic peptide and realized that it comes out at a totally different time, you should be looking at what transitions are co-eluting that they're making that assumption on. And here we also have the fact that it really does not correlate well with our spectrum. We can pull out the spectrum here and have a look at Y3 and Y4, which are supposed to be rank 4 and rank 10, but are instead rank 1 and rank 2. So if I select the transitions that they get highlighted both in the chromatograms and in the library plot. So yeah, I don't think this is my peptide. Also, I can use Shift F11 to zoom out. So you can F11, Shift F11. So we were just talking about keyboard shortcuts. Those are the two most important keyboard shortcuts in my mind, is the ability to look at everything that was measured and zoom into your peak. So there's not, this can give you pretty quick confirmation that there's no other better thing lurking out there. You could maybe zoom in and look at this one that has a 0.67 dot product, but so at this point we've spent a bunch of time looking at this. We can just delete it. This is made it through our first set of refinement, but it's clearly not something that we can quantify reliably. Yes?
The pattern is very different from the library spectrum.
Yeah, it is.
That also we can use as a criteria to decide.
Yeah, so the dot product, you see that the dot product is always about, even in the really good ones, the dot products are never higher than 0.6. So that's a good criteria. But also the fact that it's just Y3 and Y4 and not really, there's no Y9 and Y7, and Y9 and Y7 are supposed to be, Y9 is supposed to be the rank 2, right? And so we don't see it at all. So the shorter the transition, the lower the number, the more likely it is to just happen by chance. So if somebody shows you something where they monitored 6 transitions and they found just 2 or 3 and they're all really short ones, you might go, I'm not so positive that's your peptide. Like, prove it to me. Yeah, if you're reviewing a paper and somebody sends this in as like, this is, you say like, okay, show me the synthetic peptides that proves that that's the right thing. Okay, the next one. What did people see? Let's go ahead and click in peak areas and normalize to total again so that we get that view as well. Okay, so when I'm processing this data, and I can process this entire data set in an hour on a plane, and I did, and that's the results that we have up a folder higher. What I'm doing is I go down through here and just kind of go play the game of which one of these doesn't look like the others. So I would say D108 rep 2 for this retention time, and then you can just click on it, and what do people think happened? Who can explain what happened here? Yeah, it's picked the wrong peak. Is there any sign of our peak?
Yeah, it's a very far left border.
Yeah. So this is what we call a truncated peak, and it's been truncated in a way that Skyline didn't recognize it. So we can force Skyline. So then the question is, what do we do about this? What should we do? You could force Skyline to choose this peak by clicking beneath the x-axis and then just dragging, and there we go. Now we've got that peak integrated, and you can see it doesn't stick out quite so much. But what might be the problem with this?
We underestimate the area under the curve.
Yeah, we don't have a reference standard to take a ratio to. So we're going to be estimating whatever this peak area is as the area of the peptide, and you might tell me, oh, well, we got about half of it, right? But who knows? Like that peak might actually, that just might be a shoulder on some massive peak. It might be going up to 10 million or something ions per second. We really have no idea. This is just, we can't really estimate the peak area from this. And it turns out that Skyline has a value that tells it whether or not peaks are truncated. And actually, we can just quickly go to Edit, Find, and if you do Show Advanced, have people used the Edit, Find functionality yet? Okay, well, so Edit, Find, you can just type in things and it will find it in the targets view. So it's a nice way of searching, but there are also these sort of canned things that Edit, Find can find for you. And the one at the bottom is truncated peaks. So Skyline has this concept of truncated peaks, and if you just click Find All, well, I guess click Find Next first. And the first thing we find is our peak. And then if you click Find Next, it's not even finding next. Huh. I don't know what's up with that. Okay, let's click Find All. Find All. And now you can see that we have a number of truncated peaks and truncated transitions. And the first one is this D108 rep 2, the one that we just created. But there's another one in the same peptide. And if you double click on that, this is Skyline's considering this a truncated peak. And the way the Skyline decides on whether or not something's a truncated peak or not is if one of the borders is at the extreme end of the chromatogram and the transitions cross at a higher point than the other side, significantly higher. So it turns out that both Skyline and MS Stats will just throw out truncated peaks and not do statistics on them. But I would say that if you're not positive that you're using Skyline and MS Stats, it's maybe not a good idea to create a bunch of truncated peaks. So I'm going to close this. And I would suggest that this one that we just found here, we would rather just remove peak and say, yeah, we didn't get a measurement for that. So what would be the next thing you would look at? How many people feel convinced that that most of the time these measurements are actually measuring the right peptide? Our peptide of interest. We've got 6 transitions, 6 Y-ons that we're measuring. What are the indicators that it's probably our peak, our peptide?
And for people that really don't know, could you say?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Sure. So I mean, hopefully, some people in here would have some ideas, but we can see that there's coelution, right, on all the transitions. it's kind of jagged, but we're at low intensity here. But yeah, if you click on things, this is not a beautiful peak by any stretch of the imagination, but it's okay. Again, we could right click over in the peak area plot and denormalize. Be nice to have a keyboard shortcut for that. And then you can look at the most intense examples, and those are the ones most likely to show coelution on all the peaks. And I would say that this is good enough. And another thing that I'm interested in is how consistently is it integrated, right? So even if this isn't a measure of my peptide, if I'm consistently integrating something, then it's a measure of some molecule, and my goal here is to do a comparison, and presumably anything that's not measuring the right a peptide that's actually measuring a protein associated with heart failure won't change. There will be no difference, and so those will just fall out in this round of refinement. And if it turns out that it's not the right peptide and it does change, then serendipity, I've discovered something that I can then put more energy into figuring out what it is. Okay, so let's quickly look at. I would say this one kind of sticks out. I think that's going to turn out to be the one that always sticks out. And so now that we've looked at things enough, what is the measurement range for this peptide? What was actually measured, right? It's 5 minutes from 30 to 35, basically. Right? So what did we predict? When did we predict this peptide would come out from our first experiment? Yeah, 32.5. So the center of this time is where we expected to see this peptide. So we didn't quite get it right. This one's actually reasonably close. It's at about 32. But so then, now that we know that the edge of our measurement is around 30, where else can you imagine that there might be a truncated peak? When you just look at this retention time plot.
So it showed there's a little line where the peak maximum is.
Yeah.
When it's on the bottom of the bar.
Yeah. So this is, you're right. That's exactly right. So this is a great indicator right here. It's like it's at the edge, and all of the apexes are very close to the border. So yeah, like a great guess is this one at the end. And if we click on it, then yeah, you can see Skyline has found the thing. It sees that as a peak and it says that's my best pick, but it's not really a great one. And so again, if we might want to be looking for things like that. And then we could right-click and remove peak on that one. I'm going to switch back to normalized to total. So if I switch back to normalized to total, now at this point my retention times look okay. Although this one over here maybe is truncated, right? And it is. So basically I can look along this line of 30 point something and look for things that are lined up near it and find truncated peaks. What else here, before we move on, what else here is sort of not looking quite like we would expect it to be? Doesn't look like the others. Okay. D103 rep 3. Yeah, because of the peak areas. And so the retention time looked okay, but Skyline, for some reason, picked this thing to the right of our main peak. So we would like to correct that, or probably again remove peak. Okay, so that's good enough. But this is how you could explore your data.
And just a
And-
comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can remove your peak pressing Control Shift R.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, there you go. Control Shift R. And that is also in Edit, Integration, and these are all the keyboard shortcuts. Control Shift R, Control Shift S, and Control Shift A. Those are keyboard shortcuts for adjusting integration. I guess another thing, so now before we leave this, let's go over some ways that we could just review all the chromatograms pretty quickly. So one is we've always got this replicates thing at the top of targets. And so we could start at the top with D102 rep 1. And then if you press down, down, now you have, these are all the replicates for subject 102, right? And then you could go 1, 2, 3 and see all the replicates for subject 103. And you could go 1, 2, 3 and see the replicates for the next subject. And you could go through them that way. You can also, you can use control up arrow and control down arrow to go through things. It's kind of jumping around because I've got things ordered by acquired time. So I'm going to right click in one of the plots and switch the order to document. And then now it will just advance through the replicates back and forth. And I can look for, I can just quickly survey. I'm like, yep, I think I've got everything integrated correctly, but I just want to make sure there are no mistakes. And convince myself that I don't have any. All right, so, yep, yeah.
Is there a way to set up the peak identification based on the retention time, or like both like combination of the transitions and the retention time, rather than just looking at the transitions? Because that's, I think, where Skyline makes mistakes the most. Because like if you use UPLC, your retention times are basically that on, like it's.
Oh yeah. Okay, so yeah, if you're using like highly accurate chromatography, which we definitely hear from small molecule people more, then you would want to go into the document grid, and I think, let's see, small molecule transition list may have it. There are these explicit values, so you can do explicit retention time and explicit retention time window. And that's a really hard sort of prediction. And it's like, I expect this to show up at this time, and then Skyline will pick based on that. So, okay, let's keep going. Next one. I'm going to press F11 to zoom back into my peaks. People see problems with this one? So, I mean, one, the apexes of the peak go nearly straight across here, which is kind of amazing, right? This definitely tells me that retention time stability is a peptide feature, because this peptide has incredible retention time stability, and we've just seen other ones that don't have nearly that retention time stability. So. But what else can I learn? Did anybody see any problems in the peak area plot? I mean, there's a little bit more variance than I would ideally want to see. All right, so this is where I will introduce the concept of the chromatographic landscape. So when I'm looking at these plots, I actually consider them a chromatographic landscape, and my peptide of interest is ideally all I would see is my peptide of interest, but I often see other peptides, right? So other peptides may have similar mass to charge ratios, and that's what when those peptides coalute with our peptide, we consider that interference. But that interference can also be informative when it shows up outside of our peptide. So where are there other peptides here? If you just look at the chromatograms that I'm showing right now, where would you say other peptides are eluting in this chromatography? I mean, some of them are labeled. Right? So another peptide is going to be a peak where there's, it could be just one peak on one transition, or it could be multiple transitions, and then it shares multiple of your transitions, and they may be coeluting. So in this case, I would say it's pretty obvious that there's something at 13.1 that's a peptide, right? It's coeluting on two of those transitions. And then if you sort of scroll through things, you'll see that thing is fairly consistently there. I mean, it's changing as well. But 13.1, 13.2, there's always something going on my Y6 and Y5. Right? Where else? What else is going on here? What? So does anybody else see any other peptides that elute on these transitions? That share the transitions, and what? Yeah, the shoulder on the right. There's something actually that ends up interfering. This is one of the better ones, D138 rep 3. You see this thing sticking up here, which is probably not our peptide because the ordering changes. And you can see, again, on Y6, it shows up fairly frequently on Y6, off to the right side. So Y6 is probably not a good transition for me to be quantifying on. And then here so this is 135, you see this thing, and that's on Y6 and Y4. So it's hard to get a good measurement of this one without interference, but certainly if I were trying, I would probably open this up and maybe just delete Y6 and Y4. All right, let's go to the next one. Next one looks good. Anybody see any issues? This is really, what there's like, again, what doesn't look like the others? This looks beautiful, right? We wish they'd all look like that. But it's also quite a bit more intense. We've been looking at things that are down in the thousands, and this is hundreds of thousands. Anybody see anything over here? Well, I see this, so the only thing I see, so again, we like it when there's a line right across. These are nice line. There's a nice line. This one sticks out again a little bit, but this is the one I showed you before that sort of just always sticks out. And if we could normalize the retention time, we'd be pretty good. And again, if you have any question, you can always just quickly go through everything by using control down arrow or selecting, and you see that it's really quite nice all the way through. One thing is, and then if I do Shift F11, I zoom out, there's really, most of the time, there's nothing else that could compete, right? Is that actually the case? Are there no other peaks here? So again, we can click to the left side and or just put our cursor to the left of the y-axis and zoom in. And when you get down to about 1,000, you start to see the other peaks. So in previous previous peptides, we've been looking at things that are in the thousands, and so this has sort of noise at the level of the thousands, potentially even an interference right next door here on my most intense transition. It's just that the interference, well, it doesn't happen again here. But anyway, so the signal is so high that the interference is not going to impact our measurement. But it would impact our lower limit of quantification. I'm going to skip that. Let's see. We're at noon. Yeah, I guess we'll take our lunch break now.